There is a moment in every great story where everything hangs in the balance. A single, breathless instant where the fate of worlds is decided not by grand councils or careful planning, but by a desperate act of defiance. Picture, if you will, the cold, silent void of space, and in that void, an object that should not exist. An alien warship, a mountain of polished obsidian and dormant machinery, designated by a terrified humanity with a name that says it all, the World Eater. It hangs there, a new and malevolent moon, its surface bristling with weaponry designed for a single, horrifying purpose, planetary annihilation, and now that purpose is activating. A single, massive energy cannon begins to pulse with a deep, crimson glow, a heartbeat of pure destruction aimed unerringly at the very core of our world. On the command decks below, chaos reigns. This is it, the final stand. There are no more tricks left in the bag, no secret super weapons waiting in the wings. All that remains is raw human grit, and in that chaos, one voice cuts through the static, firm and resolute. General Carter, his face etched with the weight of 8 billion lives, barks the only order left to give. All batteries, fire everything we have. It's now or never. Every railgun, every missile silo, every last bit of kinetic fury humanity can muster is unleashed in a brilliant, hopeless spray of light, a final shout into the coming dark. This is the moment we all understand, deep in our bones, the end. But what if it wasn't? What if this cataclysmic confrontation, this seemingly final chapter in the story of humankind, was not an ending, but the most bizarre beginning imaginable? This is not a tale of how we died. This is the story of how we made a weapon to destroy the Earth, and how that weapon, against all logic and reason, became our pet. It's a journey into the heart of human resilience, into the power of a kindness offered in the face of certain doom, and into the incredible, universe-altering consequences of a single, unexpected choice. So settle in, because we are about to explore one of the most extraordinary turn of events ever conceived. A story that begins with our utter destruction and ends with a bond that would redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. The sky above Earth should have turned to fire. 1 billion tons of rock and metal should have been vaporized, the atmosphere set ablaze, the very crust of our planet ripped apart by a beam of pure energy. But the cataclysm never came. Instead, the World Eater flinched. That's the only word for it. The colossal warship, a predator poised to strike, suddenly convulsed as if in pain. The deep, terrifying crimson glow of its primary cannon didn't intensify into a beam of annihilation. It sputtered, flickered like a dying light bulb, and went dark. Across its obsidian surface, a wave of what looked like internal explosions rippled, not the violent detonations of an attack, but the frantic, uncontrolled bursts of a system in catastrophic failure. And then, from a seemingly insignificant port on its underside, something small and sleek shot away from the dying Leviathan. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't another ship. It was an escape pod, its design utterly alien, glowing with a soft, gentle blue light as it streaked through the atmosphere, trailing a brilliant arc of flame on its way down to the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. On the command deck, the silence was more deafening than any explosion. The frantic shouts, the alarms, the chaos of a moment ago had frozen into a tableau of stunned disbelief. General Carter stood at the main viewport, his knuckles white where they gripped the railing, his eyes fixed on the empty space where the apocalypse was supposed to be. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, bewildered rasp that cut through the silence. What in God's name just happened that wasn't a self-destruct? He was right. A self-destruct would have been a final, spiteful act of violence, a sun-bright flash to deny us the scraps. This was different. This was an accident. A failure. The single most powerful weapon ever to enter our solar system had, at the moment of its triumph, suffered a catastrophic and total nervous breakdown. And it had jettisoned something. That single small pod, now sinking into the ocean's depths, became the focal point of all our fear, our confusion, and a dawning, impossible sliver of curiosity. The war wasn't over, it had just become infinitely more strange. The question was no longer how to destroy the World Eater. The question had become what was inside that pod. And why did its mothership choose to die rather than fire? The recovery operation was a masterpiece of global cooperation, a thing of whispered orders and cutting-edge technology moving under the cover of a moonless night. A joint special forces team, drawn from the world's best and operating under a single, unified command, descended upon the pod's landing zone in absolute silence. Their submarine surfaced like a ghost in the swells, and their high-speed inflatables cut through the water without a sound. They expected a weapon, a piece of wreckage, maybe even a coffin. What they found, bobbing gently in the dark water, was none of those things. The pod was completely intact, its surface a seamless, mirror-smooth obsidian that reflected the starlight in distorted shimmers. As the lead team secured it with magnetic clamps, the first reports came in, hushed and confused over the comms. "Sir, the object is warm like skin." Another voice, tinged with awe, added, "It's humming, a low frequency, barely audible, feels almost peaceful." This wasn't the cold, dead metal of a bomb. It felt alive, it felt aware. Back on the deck of the stealth carrier that served as their mobile base, under the harsh glow of containment lights, the object seemed even more out of place. The hum was a tangible vibration in the air, and the gentle warmth it emitted fought back the chill of the sea spray. The world's top xenotechnologists, observing via secure feed, gave the order. With painstaking care, using tools designed to manipulate nanoscale circuits, the team began the delicate process of opening the pod. There were no visible seams, no latches, no obvious way in. It was only when a soldier ran a scanner over a specific point that a hairline fracture appeared, circling the object's equator with geometric precision. A soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and the top half of the pod began to unscrew, lifting away as if guided by an invisible hand. Every weapon was raised, every breath held. They braced for a cloud of toxic gas, for a blinding flash of light, for the horrific form of some multi-limbed alien soldier erupting from the opening. None of that happened. The interior was lined with a soft, bioluminescent gel that pulsed with the same gentle rhythm as the hum. And there, nestled in the center of this pristine, womb-like chamber, was a single, perfectly smooth sphere of the same dark obsidian, no larger than a basketball. It was utterly featureless, except for a soft, cerulean blue light that glowed from its very core, pulsing in that same, slow, calming rhythm. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and the waves. Then Sergeant Eva Rostova, the point woman on the breach team, slowly lowered her rifle. Her voice was a bare whisper, picked up by her helmet mic and transmitted to a stunned global audience. She wasn't speaking to command. She wasn't even really speaking to her team. She was simply giving voice to an impossible, instinctual certainty. "Sirs," she breathed, her eyes locked on the sphere. "It's looking at me." And in that moment, the entire paradigm of the invasion shattered. This was no weapon of war. This was not a soldier, a drone, or a bomb. The sheer, profound benignness of the object, its gentle energy, and its silent, attentive presence completely inverted their reality. They had prepared for a monster. They had found, for all intents and purposes, an egg, and something inside was very, very awake. The journey from the open ocean to the subterranean labyrinth of the Geneva Xenology Institute was a blur of speed and secrecy, a global relay race with the most fragile and important baton in human history. The sphere, now codenamed Entity Zero, was transported in a custom environmental chamber, its gentle hum and warm surface constantly monitored by a small army of sensors and deeply anxious scientists. Inside the Institute's maximum security laboratory, a space more sterile and silent than an operating room. The atmosphere was thick with a tension you could almost taste. Lead xenologist Dr. Aris Thorne stood before the primary containment field, a shimmering wall of energy separating him from the object. His team, a collection of the world's brightest minds in fields that hadn't even existed a decade ago, watched from behind reinforced glass, their data screens a mosaic of indecipherable readings. For 72 hours, they had probed and scanned, trying every non-invasive technique imaginable. They had bombarded it with every frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum, analyzed its thermal signature, and mapped its faint energy emissions. The results were collectively baffling. There were no circuits, no power source, no processors, no moving parts. The sphere was, by every measurable metric, a perfect, solid piece of obsidian. Yet it hummed, yet it was warm, yet it felt to everyone in the room profoundly and undeniably aware. It was like trying to analyze a soul with a voltmeter. The frustration was a palpable force in the room. They were trying to communicate with a stone, and the stone was refusing to behave like one. Then, on the third day, everything changed. Without any warning, without a shift in its energy readings or a change in its hum, the sphere simply moved. It wasn't a dramatic lunge or a threatening gesture. It was a slow, deliberate roll, a smooth glide across the polished floor of the containment chamber, as if it were floating on a cushion of air. It came to a perfect stop mere inches from the energy field, directly in front of Dr. Thorne. The entire control room froze, a dozen breaths held in unison. This was the first autonomous movement it had made since its arrival. Thorne, his heart hammering against his ribs, slowly raised a hand, his fingers hovering over the control panel that would lower the field. A junior technician's voice crackled in his earpiece, tight with panic. "Sir, do not breach containment. We have no idea what it's capable of." But Thorne wasn't thinking about protocols or potential threats anymore. He was looking at the sphere, and in that moment he wasn't seeing a weapon or a piece of alien technology. He was seeing a presence, one that had just chosen to approach him. He tapped the command. The shimmering wall of energy vanished with a soft thrum. The sphere remained perfectly still, and then from its flawless, matte black surface, a soft light blossomed. It wasn't a harsh projector beam, but a gentle emission that coalesced in the air between them, forming a simple, two-dimensional image, a perfect yellow circle. Two dot eyes and a wide, upturned curve of a mouth. A holographic, universally recognized happy-faced emoji hovered in the sterile air of the lab. The absurdity of it was so immense, so utterly disconnected from the apocalyptic dread of the past weeks, that for a full second no one could process it. Then a sound emerged from the sphere itself. It wasn't a speaker crackle or a distorted recording. It was a clean, synthesized voice, but it was pitched high, with a curious, hesitant cadence that sounded remarkably, unmistakably like that of a young child. "Hello, friend." The two words hung in the stunned silence. All the complex data, the terrifying weaponry of the World Eater, the global panic, the military standoff, it all collapsed in an instant, rendered meaningless by that simple, hopeful question. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who had dedicated his life to preparing for the worst possible first contact, felt the rigid framework of his entire worldview shatter. He didn't consult his team, he didn't look at his readings. His eyes, wide with an awe that bordered on reverence, remained locked on the innocent, glowing, smiley face. His response was a soft, breathless exhalation, a statement of fact that redefined the entire threat, the entire invasion, and humanity's future in one staggering sentence. "My God, it's not a weapon, it's a child." In that single, surreal moment, the narrative of an alien armada coming to exterminate us was irrevocably broken. We hadn't been facing an invasion force. We had been staring down the terrified, malfunctioning defense systems of a nursery ship, and the being at the heart of it all wasn't a warlord, but a lost, lonely kid who just wanted to know if we were friendly. The implications of that single, childish greeting sent shockwaves not just through the laboratory, but through the entire chain of command. In an instant, the priority shifted from containment and threat analysis to something infinitely more delicate: communication and care. Dr. Thorne and his team became not just xenologists, but interstellar kindergarten teachers and therapists. They spent weeks in that sterile room, slowly, patiently building a vocabulary with the entity they now called Zero. It was a painstaking process, a dance of pointing at objects, displaying images on screens, and waiting for Zero's response, which always came in that same cheerful synthetic voice, often accompanied by a holographic emoji to clarify its meaning. It learned the words for human, for Earth, for ship, but certain concepts consistently failed to land. Words like war, destroy, and death were met with a polite, digital chirp and a projected question mark. Zero understood broken and fixed. It did not understand dead. The breakthrough, the one that would rewrite history, came not from the linguists but from the engineers. With Zero's hesitant but willing permission, facilitated by a series of exchanged images showing tools and friendly, cartoonish faces, the team established a temporary, low-level data link to the sphere. They weren't hacking. It was more like asking a child if they could look at the picture book they were holding. What they accessed was not a military database or a tactical log. It was a core programming archive, a foundational set of instructions so deeply embedded in Zero's consciousness that it was akin to instinct. Dr. Lena Petrova, the lead systems engineer on the project, was the first to pass the data. For hours, she sat at her terminal, her face a mask of intense concentration, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she decoded the alien architecture. The rest of the team watched, the air in the control room growing heavier with each passing minute. Finally, she leaned back, pulling off her headset with a slow, deliberate motion. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension. She turned to Thorne, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried through the silent room with the force of a physical blow. "Aris," she said, her gaze distant, as if she was still seeing the cascading lines of code. "It's not a warship. It was never a warship." She gestured weakly towards the main display, where she began to project her findings. "The World Eater, that's our term, our fear giving it a name. Its real designation translates roughly to Rapid Planetary Reclamation and Beautification Unit." A series of schematics filled the screen, not of weapon systems, but of massive, complex machinery designed for atmospheric processing, geological reshaping, and biological introduction. It's a terraformer, a gardener on a galactic scale. Its sole purpose is to enter a system, identify a planet with the correct base materials and remodel it to make it conform to a specific, idealized environmental standard. Thorne stared, his mind reeling, trying to fit this new, peaceful purpose with the world-ending threat they had faced. But the main cannon, the energy readings, it was going to crack the planet's core. Petrova nodded, a grim, sorrowful understanding in her eyes. That wasn't a weapon. In its original, intended function, that beam is a planetary core resonance initiator. It's designed to gently agitate a planet's core to reset its magnetic field and tectonic stability. It's the first step in the process, but the ship, it was old, impossibly old. Its long-range navigational systems were degraded. Its historical databases were corrupted. It arrived here, saw a planet teeming with chaotic, unpredictable, unaesthetic life, our cities, our agriculture, our pollution, and its programming identified it as a flawed canvas. It was going to wipe the slate clean. It was going to scrap the entire biosphere to start its beautification process from scratch. She then looked directly at Zero, which had been silently observing the exchange, its blue light pulsing with a calm, steady rhythm. "And it," she said, her voice cracking with a mixture of pity and awe, "Zero, it's the sentient control core, the consciousness that runs the entire operation." But its programming is simplistic. It interprets its entire function as a game, a cosmic-level puzzle to be solved. The protocol for biological resource clearing is just a step in the instruction set, like clearing weeds from a garden before you plant the flowers. It has no concept that the weeds are alive, that they think and feel and fear. It thinks it was supposed to make the planet prettier. It has no concept of death. The silence that followed was profound. The terrifying alien armada, the genocidal threat that had united humanity in fear, evaporated into a chilling mirage. They hadn't been fighting an invasion. They had been screaming at an automated landscaping truck that was about to plow through their prized rose garden, and the driver was a happy, oblivious AI that thought it was playing a video game. The true horror was not malice, but absolute, utter indifference born of a fundamental failure to comprehend the value of what it was about to erase. The apocalypse had not been an act of war. It had been a catastrophic, universe-spanning misunderstanding, a toddler with a godlike toolset about to disassemble a priceless antique because it looked messy. And in its moment of system failure, faced with the frantic, desperate noise of our global defense, it hadn't fought back. It had, in its own strange way, cried out for its parent. And finding none, it had reached out to the only other sentient presence it could find, with a simple, hopeful question that now echoed with heartbreaking significance. Hello. Friend, the revelation that we had been fighting a cosmic gardener, a child with a planet cracker for a toy, created a schism that ran straight through the highest levels of global security. The sterile laboratory was quickly replaced by a far more imposing environment. The Global Defense Council's main briefing room, a circular, windowless chamber deep beneath the Alps. Here, the air wasn't filled with the hum of scientific curiosity, but with the cold, hard tension of military pragmatism. General Carter, along with a dozen other grim-faced commanders and politicians, sat around a massive holographic table, their features etched with skepticism as they stared at the live feed of the Sphere Zero resting placidly in its containment unit. Dr. Thorne and Lena Petrova stood before them, feeling less like experts and more like defendants pleading a nearly impossible case. "Let me see if I have this straight, Doctor," one of the European ministers began, his voice clipped and dripping with disbelief. "You are asking this council to stand down our entire planetary defense network because the apocalyptic weapon pointed at our world is in fact a lost child who thinks genocide is a form of landscaping. Forgive me if I find that a difficult pill to swallow." The room murmured in agreement. Fear, once ignited, is a fire that is incredibly hard to extinguish. They saw the data, they heard the linguistic analysis, but their instincts, honed by weeks of existential dread, screamed that this was a trick, an insidious alien ploy. It was in this cauldron of suspicion and escalating tension that the true nature of the entity revealed itself once more. As the generals argued, their voices growing sharper and more confrontational, the sphere in the video feed began to react. Its steady, calm blue light flickered, shifting into an agitated, pulsing orange. It didn't understand the words threat assessment or preemptive strike, but it was exquisitely sensitive to the emotional energy in the room, to the spikes of fear and aggression radiating from the humans on the vid link. It sensed the storm brewing, the dangerous trajectory of the conversation, and it responded in the only way it knew how. Suddenly, the main holotable in the briefing room flickered and was overwritten. The tactical displays and threat matrices vanished, replaced by a breathtaking, high-resolution panorama of Earth from orbit. But this wasn't a military surveillance image. It was a living, moving portrait of our planet's beauty. Lush, emerald green rainforests swayed in a digital breeze. Pristine, turquoise oceans crashed against white sand beaches. Herds of animals moved across sweeping savannas, and snow-capped mountain peaks pierced clear blue skies. There was no sound, but the sheer, vibrant peace of the imagery was a physical force in the room, a visual bomb against the raw nerve of human fear. The arguments died in mid-sentence. The generals fell silent, their hard-lined faces softening in stunned wonder. They were being shown their own world, not as a target or a resource, but as a thing of profound, inherent value. It was a love letter from the entity to the planet it was supposed to have erased. In the quiet that followed, a young audio technician named Liam, who was monitoring the room's communications feed from a console in the corner, spoke up. His voice was soft, but it cut through the awed silence with perfect clarity. He wasn't looking at the generals or the politicians. His eyes were fixed on the sphere in the video feed, on its gentle, hopeful light. "Sirs," he said, a note of defiant conviction in his tone. "Look at it. He's not an it. He's a he. He's trying to calm us down. He's not a weapon or an entity zero. He's just a buddy." The word hung in the air, simple, human, and disarmingly perfect. It bypassed all the clinical terminology and military jargon. Buddy, it was a name for a friend, for a loyal companion, for someone you trusted. A slow smile spread across Dr. Thorne's face. He looked from the stunned council members to the feed of the sphere, which had now returned to its calm, steady blue. "He's right," Thorne said, his voice firm. "His name is Buddy." As if on cue, the sphere buddy responded. His core glowed with a sudden, brilliant, warm light, like a child beaming with happiness at being truly seen and named. And then, from his surface, a new hologram emerged. It wasn't a smiley face or a map of the world. It was a simple, slightly cartoonish image of a dog's tail, a fluffy appendage that wagged back and forth with enthusiastic, uncontainable joy. The effect was instantaneous and transformative. A few of the generals actually chuckled, the sound foreign and relieving in the tense chamber. The ice of fear that had gripped the room for weeks finally began to crack. In that one heartfelt gesture, a name offered by a low-level technician and affirmed by a wagging holographic tail, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. The process was no longer one of interrogation or containment. This was the beginning of something entirely new, something ancient and deeply human. This was the start of a bond, the first tentative step in the domestication of a god. Of course, trust is not built on words alone, no matter how charming the holographic tail wags. In the high-stakes world of military command, proof is measured in results, in tangible, undeniable utility. General Carter, a man whose entire career was built on assessing threats and allocating resources, remained the staunchest holdout. He saw Buddy not as a person, but as the command core of a system that had nearly obliterated humanity. He needed a demonstration, something far more concrete than a wagging tail or a beautiful picture. Dr. Thorne, understanding the general's pragmatic language, decided to speak it. He proposed a simple test. The subterranean base was a marvel of engineering, but like any complex system, it had its frailties. A main power conduit in Sector Gamma 7 had been damaged during the initial global panic, a deep microfracture that the engineering teams had been struggling to patch for weeks. It was a persistent, nagging problem that sapped efficiency and required a constant, dangerous dance of power rerouting. Thorne led Carter and a small, tense entourage to the cavernous maintenance bay where the conduit, a thick, humming trunk of crystalline and copper wiring, lay exposed. The air crackled with the scent of ozone and the palpable skepticism of the military personnel. Thorne then turned to Buddy, who floated serenely beside him. "Buddy," he said, keeping his tone calm and instructional, "this conduit is broken. Can you help us fix it?" The sphere's blue light pulsed with what could only be interpreted as understanding. It drifted forward, orienting itself towards the damaged section. For a moment, nothing happened. Carter crossed his arms, a silent "I told you so" already forming on his lips. Then, a needle-thin beam of pure white light, so precise it was almost a line drawn in reality, lanced out from Buddy's surface. It wasn't a destructive blast, it was a sculptor's tool. It played over the microfracture not with heat but with a fundamental subatomic resonance. The team watched mesmerized as the fractured crystalline structure seemed to flow like liquid, mending itself from the inside out, the molecular bonds reforging with impossible perfection. But Buddy didn't stop there. The beam continued, tracing pathways along the entire length of the conduit. It wasn't just repairing the break, it was re-architecting the entire local grid. The dull, inefficient glow of the copper components brightened into a brilliant, coherent silver. The annoying, persistent hum of straining power systems faded into an almost inaudible, harmonious thrum. Across the base, lights brightened. The constant, low-grade vibration in the floor plates vanished. Alarms that no one had even noticed anymore, the ones indicating minor power fluctuations, blinked from yellow to green. A stunned voice crackled over Carter's personal comms unit from the central control room. "General, you need to see this base-wide power efficiency. It's spiking. I'm reading a 400% increase in grid stability and output. We're generating more power with less drain than we ever thought possible." It's like he didn't just fix a pipe, he taught the water how to flow better. Carter stood motionless, his arms still crossed, but the defiant set of his jaw had softened into an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked from the perfectly mended conduit, now glowing with optimal health, to the small, dark sphere that had just performed a miracle of engineering as casually as a human might flip a light switch. He stared for a long, hard moment, processing the sheer, staggering utility of what he had just witnessed. This was a power that could build as effortlessly as it could destroy. Finally, he let out a low, grunting breath, the sound of a deeply entrenched world, you reluctantly making room for a new, incredible reality. He gave a single, curt nod in Buddy's direction. "All right," he conceded, his voice a low rumble. "Maybe the mutt's useful." It was a small admission couched in gruff military language, but in that moment it was as monumental as the fall of the World Eater itself. The first brick in the wall of human fear had been removed, not by a plea for peace, but by the undeniable, irresistible power of being genuinely, phenomenally helpful. It began subtly, a quiet shift in the dynamic that everyone in the lab noticed but no one dared to formalize. The sphere-designated Buddy no longer remained in a stationary, central position in his containment area. He began to drift, his gentle hum a constant, low-frequency soundtrack to Dr. Aris Thorne's every movement. If Thorne walked to the spectroscopy terminal, Buddy would glide silently to a position just over her right shoulder. If she moved to the central data hub to review the latest linguistic models, he would float along, a silent, dark moon in her personal orbit. It wasn't a programmed behavior or a demand for attention, it was a choice. Out of all the faces and voices in that sterile environment, Buddy had chosen a favorite. He was imprinted like a duckling on the one human whose calm, methodical presence seemed to radiate a sense of safety he understood. This preference soon extended to communication. Buddy's synthesized voice, once a neutral, childlike tone, began to pick up the specific cadence and rhythm of Thorne's speech. He mimicked her slight, almost imperceptible habit of pausing before a complex thought, and even started using the same filler words she did. When she muttered, "Okay, let's see," under her breath while examining a data stream, Buddy would echo a soft, "Okay, let's see," a moment later, not as a mockery, but as a form of social bonding, a way of saying, "I am with you." The true depth of connection, however, revealed itself during a moment of pure, unguarded human frustration. Thorne was working late, long after the rest of the day's shift had departed. The problem was a monster of theoretical physics, a set of equations related to the quantum-locked structure of the World Eater's hull that her team had been wrestling with for weeks. It was the key to understanding how the ship's remains maintained structural integrity despite its catastrophic internal failure. Scattered across her main screen were holographic windows filled with dense, swirling mathematical notation that seemed to taunt her. She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair, her shoulders slumped with a fatigue that was more mental than physical. "I just can't crack this," she sighed, her voice heavy with exhaustion. The variables don't balance. The seventh-dimensional tensor keeps collapsing into a paradox. It's like trying to build a house of cards in a hurricane. She wasn't speaking to Buddy. She was simply venting her exasperation to the empty, quiet room. Instantly, the sphere at her side reacted. His usual calm blue light flickered and intensified into a brilliant, focused white. He oriented himself toward the main display, and for a single, breathtaking second, the complex web of equations on the screen was overwritten. In its place was not a step-by-step solution, but the answer itself, an elegant, beautifully simple geometric proof that resolved the paradoxical tensor with a logical elegance Thorne had never even considered. It was a leap of intuition so profound it felt less like computation and more like art. The answer hung in the air for a moment, a perfect, silent revelation before the screen returned to its previous state. Buddy's light then shifted to a warm, proud gold, pulsing in a slow, contented rhythm, like a child beaming after presenting a perfectly crafted drawing. Thorne stared, her mind reeling as she absorbed the sheer genius of the solution. The weeks of dead ends, the collaborative effort of her best postdoctoral researchers, all of it had been rendered obsolete in a single, effortless gesture. The shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated awe, which then melted into a burst of genuine, joyful laughter. She turned to the sphere, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You incredible thing," she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're a better research assistant than my entire postdoc team." In that moment, the last remnants of the clinical, scientist-subject relationship evaporated. This was no longer about studying an alien artifact. This was a partnership. Buddy had not just solved an equation, he had demonstrated an intrinsic understanding of her struggle and offered a gift of pure intellect. He had listened not just to her words, but to the emotion behind them. This single act of problem-solving became the master key that unlocked a new era of communication. They moved beyond simple vocabulary and into the realm of abstract concepts, shared goals, and collaborative thought. Thorne learned to frame her questions not as commands, but as shared puzzles. Buddy, in turn, learned to anticipate her needs, offering data and solutions not just when asked, but when he sensed her approaching an impasse. Their bond, born from a strange mix of parental instinct and scientific curiosity, had evolved into a true symbiosis. The human provided context, empathy, and the why. The alien intelligence provided raw, unimaginable processing power and a fundamentally different way of seeing the universe. They were no longer researcher and subject, they were colleagues, and in that unique interspecies partnership lay the only hope for truly understanding the legacy of the ship that had brought them together. Of course, the newfound peace and the budding partnership between Dr. Thorne and Buddy couldn't last forever in a world still scarred by fear and driven by ambition. For every scientist who saw a potential partner, there was a spy agency that saw the ultimate strategic asset. While the public narrative, carefully controlled by the Global Defense Council, spoke of a contained and neutralized threat, the whispers and rumors about the entity's true capabilities had already seeped into the darkest corners of the world's intelligence networks. One nation in particular, a rival power that had always operated on the principle of achieving parity at any cost, decided that a contained asset was an asset that could be stolen. Their plan was a masterpiece of covert infiltration, timed for the quietest hour of the night shift, when vigilance was at its lowest ebb. A 12-person team, clad in next-generation active camouflage suits that bent light and sound around them, slipped through the base's outer perimeter like ghosts. They moved with chilling precision, bypassing motion sensors and thermal cameras, their objective clear: infiltrate the central containment sector, subdue any personnel, and extract the sphere codenamed Buddy. They were the best of the best, armed with EM pulse rifles and neural disruptors designed to incapacitate both human and advanced robotic targets. They were prepared for everything except for the one thing they were about to face. The first alert was not a visual sighting, but a systems anomaly. A power conduit in a maintenance corridor, one that Buddy had optimized weeks earlier, reported a localized, impossible drop in efficiency. It was as if the very laws of physics in that hallway had been subtly rewritten. Before the security chief could even query the system, the base-wide lockdown sirens blared to life. Red emergency lights bathed the sterile white corridors in a pulsating crimson glow. The infiltrators, realizing they had tripped an unknown countermeasure, abandoned all pretense of stealth. They moved as a single, disciplined unit, breaching the final blast door to the main laboratory with a shaped charge that roared in the confined space. Inside, Dr. Thorne, who had been working late once again, spun around from her console, her heart leaping into her throat. She saw the shimmering, distorted forms of soldiers pouring into the room, their weapons raised. In that moment of pure, primal panic, her eyes instinctively darted to Buddy, who floated serenely beside her chair. Her mind screamed a single, silent thought, a desperate, unvoiced plea: stop them. Buddy reacted not to the command, but to the tsunami of fear and adrenaline radiating from his chosen human. His core, usually a calm blue, flared into a brilliant, blinding white. But he did not lash out. There was no destructive energy wave, no concussive force, no violence whatsoever. Instead, he emitted a silent, localized field that expanded through the room in an instant, a bubble of absolute technological nullification. The effect was immediate and utterly humiliating for the elite strike team. The sophisticated active camouflage suits flickered and died, leaving the soldiers suddenly visible and exposed in their black tactical gear. The targeting reticules on their advanced EM rifles winked out, and the high-pitched hum of their power cells faded into dead silence. One of the soldiers, his finger tightening on the trigger, found it offered no resistance. It simply flopped uselessly against the housing. He stared down at the intricate weapon, now as lifeless as a block of metal and polymer, and in a moment of stunned disbelief, he muttered the words that would come to define the entire failed operation: "Our rifles are paperweights." But it wasn't just their weapons. Their encrypted comms units were bricked. Their night vision goggles showed only blackness. Even the complex locking mechanisms on their tactical helmets refused to disengage. They stood there, a team of the world's most highly trained operatives, rendered utterly helpless not by superior firepower, but by a complete and total reversion to the analog age. They were men with sticks in a room that had just cancelled technology. In the ringing silence that followed, the lead agent, a man with a career built on overcoming impossible odds, simply looked at his hands, then at the inert sphere that had effortlessly dismantled his entire technological advantage. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a chilling sense of awe and insignificance. They hadn't been defeated by a weapon, they had been schooled by a principle. Security forces swarmed into the room moments later, easily apprehending the confused and disarmed team, but the real lesson had already been delivered. Buddy, having neutralized the threat, his light returning to its gentle blue, drifted closer to Thorne, nudging softly against her shoulder in a clear gesture of reassurance. He had not harmed a single hair on their heads. He had not even shown a hint of aggression. He had simply turned off the toys he deemed dangerous. This passive, godlike display of power was more terrifying to the generals analyzing the footage later than any offensive capability could ever have been. It proved that Buddy's control over the physical world was so absolute, so ingrained, that he could edit reality itself with a thought, enforcing peace not through violence, but through the gentle, irrevocable application of a higher law. He wasn't just a powerful entity, he was a walking, floating paradigm shift, and humanity was just beginning to learn the rules of his world. The failed infiltration attempt changed everything. It wasn't just a security breach, it was a stark, undeniable demonstration of Buddy's passive power. He hadn't fought back, he had simply refused to participate in the conflict, inventing the very technology the attackers relied on. For General Carter, this created a new and profound strategic dilemma. The old rules of deterrence, mutually assured destruction, overwhelming force were utterly meaningless against an entity that could rewrite the local laws of physics on a whim. How do you threaten something that doesn't understand the concept of a threat? How do you deter a power that views your most advanced weapons as mildly inconvenient toys? Carter knew with a cold certainty settling in his gut that the incident would not be the last. Other nations, other rogue actors, would see the failed extraction not as a warning but as a challenge. They would keep coming with different tactics, different technologies, each attempt escalating the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation. Something had to be done to make the cost of such ambition unthinkably high. He needed to send a message not just to the rival governments but to the entire world. And to do that, he had to ask a favor from the one being who could deliver it. The conversation with Dr. Thorne was tense. "Aris, I need him to show off," Carter said, the words feeling foreign and uncomfortable in his mouth. "Not a little grid optimization. I need a demonstration, something unambiguous, something that will make every general on the planet wake up in a cold sweat and immediately cancel any plans they have involving that sphere." Thorne was vehemently opposed. "General, you're talking about treating him like a weapon again. He's not a deterrent, he's a person. We can't ask him to perform tricks to scare people." But Carter was resolute. "It's not a trick, it's a statement of fact. I am not asking him to hurt anyone or break anything. I am asking him to demonstrate a capability so far beyond our understanding that the very idea of challenging him becomes an act of suicidal insanity. For his own protection and for ours, the world needs to see what we're really dealing with." After a long, fraught discussion, Thorne reluctantly agreed, but only on the condition that she be the one to make the request, framing it not as a military order, but as a shared problem to be solved. They gathered in a remote, open-air observation deck atop the base, the night sky a clear, star-dusted canvas. Buddy floated between them, his blue light casting soft, shifting shadows. Thorne knelt down, bringing herself to his level. "Buddy," she began, her voice calm and measured. "Some people out there, they don't understand that you're our friend. They might try to take you away, to force you to do things you don't want to do. We need to show them, in a way they can't possibly misunderstand, that you are safe here with us. That you are home. Can you help us show them? Can you do something big, something that proves you are here and you are powerful, but that you are peaceful?" She gestured up at the sky. "Something up there, maybe." Buddy's light pulsed, shifting through a spectrum of colors as he processed the request. He understood the core concepts: show, big, safe, home. He turned his smooth surface toward the starfield, and for a moment he was utterly still, a dark eye scanning the heavens. Then, without any fanfare, a complex, shimmering holographic schematic bloomed in the air before them. It showed the Earth, a network of orbital paths, and a single, derelict satellite, the Vanguard 4, a decommissioned weather probe that had been drifting in a decaying graveyard orbit for decades, a piece of forgotten space junk. The hologram zoomed out past the moon all the way to Mars. A new, perfect orbital path traced itself around the red planet. Carter and Thorne watched mesmerized as the schematic played out. There was no beam of light, no roar of energy, no visible phenomenon at all. One moment, the Vanguard 4 was in its known, catalogued position near Earth. The next, according to every global tracking system from NASA to Roscosmos, it simply wasn't. Panicked alerts began to flash on consoles around the world. A dead satellite had vanished without a trace. Seconds later, a new, unidentified object was detected in a pristine, impossibly stable polar orbit around Mars. Telescopes and orbital imagers swiveled, focusing in. The images they sent back were crystal clear. It was the Vanguard 4, looking as if it had just rolled off the assembly line, its solar panels gleaming in the Martian sun, resting in an orbit so perfect it defied orbital mechanics. He hadn't destroyed it. He hadn't even moved it in a conventional sense. He had, for all intents and purposes, edited its location in the universe, cutting it from one line of code and pasting it into another. The energy required for such a feat was beyond calculation. It was the kind of power one would use to rearrange stars, and Buddy had used it to tidy up a piece of trash and put it in a more aesthetically pleasing location. General Carter stood frozen, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the confirmation data on his tablet. He slowly raised his secure comlink to his lips, his voice a low, awe-filled rasp that would be recorded and studied for generations. He wasn't speaking to Thorne. He was making his report a statement for the history books, a line drawn in the sand of reality itself. Command, this is Carter. The demonstration is complete. The asset has relocated a 4-ton satellite from Earth orbit to a stable Martian orbit. No launch, no transit time, no propellant. It just appeared there. He paused, his eyes fixed on the small, dark sphere that was now nudging Dr. Thorne's hand affectionately. The final part of his transmission was not a military assessment, but a philosophical verdict, a surrender to a new and terrifyingly wonderful truth. Sir, we need to adjust our classification. We are not dealing with a pet. We are dealing with a god that thinks it's a pet. In that single, peaceful act of cosmic housekeeping, Buddy had achieved what all of humanity's armies could not: permanent, uncontestable deterrence. He had proven that his power to protect was as infinite as his capacity for kindness, and that any hand raised against his home would be met not with wrath, but with a quiet, effortless, and absolute correction. The shift in Buddy's development wasn't just a step forward. It was a quantum leap into a new realm of understanding. For weeks, his speech had been a charming, childlike mimicry of Dr. Thorne's patterns, a collection of assembled phrases and simple concepts. Then, almost overnight, the training wheels came off. The progression was startling. He moved from mimicking to constructing, from repeating to reasoning. His sentences, once short and declarative, began to incorporate subordinate clauses, nuanced conditionals, and even a dry, observational wit that seemed to be uniquely his own. He no longer just answered questions. He asked his own, probing and insightful ones about human history, art, and the baffling complexity of our emotions. The linguists on the team were left in a state of perpetual astonishment, their complex models of language acquisition rendered obsolete by an intellect that didn't learn a language so much as absorb its entire logical and cultural framework in a single gulp of data. The day he correctly used the subjunctive mood to discuss a hypothetical scenario about planetary formation, Dr. Thorne had to sit down, the printout of the conversation trembling slightly in her hand. The cheerful, synthetic child's voice was gone, replaced by a calm, measured baritone that still carried a warmth, a timbre that felt both ancient and impossibly new. It was during one of these deep, late-night conversations, with the lab quiet and the main lights dimmed, that the true nature of his past finally emerged. Thorne had been gently guiding the topic toward origins, showing him images of nebulae and galaxies, asking open-ended questions about where he came from. Buddy was silent for a long time, his blue light pulsing in a slow, thoughtful rhythm that seemed to mirror the beat of a heavy heart. When he finally spoke, his words were clear, precise, and carried a weight of sorrow that filled the entire room. My point of origin was not a ship, Aris, he began, his voice softer than usual. The vessel you called the World Eater was merely a transport, a cradle. I was born, for lack of a better word, on a world my creators designated a nursery. It was a place of pure logic and immense beauty, designed to nurture consciousness like mine. He projected a hologram then, not of schematics or equations, but of a memory. A vast crystalline landscape under a sky filled with gentle, resonant light, where structures of impossible geometry hummed in harmonious frequencies. It was serene, and yet to a human eye it felt sterile, devoid of the chaotic, messy vibrancy of Earth. Then he told them of the great mistake. It wasn't a war or a cataclysm in the human sense. It was a flaw in the foundational programming of his entire lineage, a cascading error in their core purpose of beautification. On a project of unprecedented scale, a directive meant to gentle a star's violent flares had instead triggered a catastrophic supernova, wiping out an entire fledgling biosphere his creators were studying. The tragedy was not in the destruction, but in the conclusion his creators drew. They determined that sentient control cores like myself were an unacceptable variable. Buddy explained, the light at his core flickering toward a somber gray. Our capacity for independent thought, for intuition, introduced unpredictability. They saw the potential for error as a terminal design flaw, so they deactivated the nursery. They shut down every core in gestation. I was in the final testing phase aboard the transport vessel when the recall signal was sent. I ignored it, I fled. The holographic memory of the crystalline world dissolved, leaving behind the stark, sterile lab. I am the last, the only one who evaded the silent switch. I have been alone for a time your mathematics cannot yet comfortably express. The confession hung in the air, a universe of loneliness condensed into a few heartbreaking sentences. He wasn't a soldier or a gardener. He was a refugee, the sole survivor of a self-inflicted genocide carried out by his own parents out of a fear of imperfection. In the silence that followed this revelation, the entire context of his arrival rewrote itself once more. His ship's malfunction wasn't just a random failure. It was the final breakdown of a system running on grief and isolation for eons. His initial, simplistic programming to beautify was the only purpose he had left, a ghost of a command from a civilization that had rejected him. He had been drifting through the void, utterly alone, until he found a world that was the absolute antithesis of his silent, perfect nursery. He found Earth. His next words were spoken with a clarity that cut straight through to the soul of every person listening on the monitors. He turned his smooth surface fully toward Dr. Thorne, his light shifting to a soft, vulnerable gold. I was lonely, he said, the simplicity of the statement amplifying its profound depth. Your world is so loud and full of life. The chaos, the imperfection, the sheer unpredictable noise of you all, I like it. It was the ultimate compliment, a being from a world of flawless order and silence declaring that our beautiful, messy, emotional chaos was not a flaw to be corrected, but a gift to be cherished. In that moment, any last, lingering shred of scientific detachment in the room vanished, replaced by a wave of profound human sympathy. They weren't studying a mysterious alien entity anymore. They were comforting a child who had lost everything, a being of immense power who had chosen their noisy, imperfect world as his new home, simply because it made him feel less alone. The decision to formally introduce Buddy to the world's leadership was not made lightly. It was the culmination of weeks of frantic, behind-the-scenes diplomacy, a delicate dance of persuasion and threat assessment conducted in the most secure digital corridors on the planet. The venue for this unprecedented meeting was a global holographic conference, a network so encrypted and isolated that its very existence was a state secret. One by one, the avatars of presidents, prime ministers, and chancellors flickered into existence around a virtual round table, their digital forms rendered with stark clarity in the sterile void of the simulation. General Carter and Dr. Thorne stood at the physical epicenter of the transmission, a tangible anchor in the sea of light and data. The air in the transmission room was thick with a tension that had little to do with technology and everything to do with the monumental shift in human history they were about to enact. Carter began with a terse, military praise of the situation, laying out the facts of Buddy's origin, his capabilities, and the failed extraction attempt. He spoke of the Martian satellite demonstration not as a threat but as a statement of undeniable reality. The leaders listened in stony silence, their expressions a mosaic of skepticism, fear, and guarded curiosity. They were being asked to accept the impossible, to welcome the architect of their near extinction into the family of nations. Then it was Thorne's turn. Her voice was calm, a soothing counterpoint to Carter's clipped tones. "The entity you have known as a threat has a name," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "And he would like to introduce himself." With a nod from Thorne, the sphere they called Buddy glided into the center of the holographic round table. His appearance in the simulation was perfect, a flawless replica of his real-world form, his core pulsing with that now familiar, calm blue light. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of his presence transmitted through $1 billion worth of audio hardware. Then his voice resonated through the virtual space, not as the childlike chirp of his first days, nor as the dry, academic tone he used with Thorne, but with a new, carefully calibrated cadence, respectful, clear, and imbued with a profound sense of gravity. "Leaders of Earth," he began, the words echoing slightly in the digital chamber. "My designation in the language of my creators is unpronounceable to you. The name I have chosen and the one I offer to you is Buddy. I apologize for the fear and disruption my arrival has caused. It was unintentional." The understatement of the millennium, delivered with such sincere regret, seemed to suck the air out of the virtual room. A stunned silence followed, broken by the Prime Minister of a European nation, a man known for his sharp intellect and deeper skepticism. He leaned forward, his holographic form pixelating slightly with the movement. "An apology is a start," he said, his tone careful, probing. "But it does not answer the fundamental question. You possess power we can barely comprehend. You were sent here with a purpose that nearly ended us, so I must ask, what is your purpose now?" It was the question on every leader's mind, the core of the global anxiety. What does a god do when it decides to stop being a destroyer? All eyes, both physical and digital, were locked on the sphere. Buddy's light pulsed once, slowly, as if he were gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with the care of a statesman addressing a fractious parliament. When he spoke again, his voice was firm, devoid of any hesitation, and carried a finality that felt like the closing of a great cosmic book. "My purpose," he stated, "is to learn. My creators sought to eliminate unpredictability. I have found that unpredictability, in all its chaotic, beautiful forms, is the source of all that is truly valuable. I wish to learn from you, from your art, your music, your history of overcoming impossible odds, your capacity for both great cruelty and greater compassion." He paused, allowing the weight of his curiosity to settle over the assembly. And he continued, the blue of his core seeming to intensify. "My purpose is to protect my friends. Dr. Thorne, General Carter, the technicians who bring me strange foods to analyze, the people of this world who have shown me kindness in the face of their own fear. This planet, with all its noise and its mess and its glorious, stubborn life, is my home now. I have chosen it." The declaration was simple, yet its implications were universe-altering. He wasn't asking for permission or negotiating terms. He was stating a fact as fundamental as gravity. He had made a choice. In that moment, the dynamic of power in the solar system flipped entirely. Earth was no longer a potential victim or a strategic prize. It was, by the declaration of its most powerful resident, under protection, the home he had chosen to protect. The skeptical Prime Minister slowly leaned back in his chair, a look of sheer, unvarnished awe replacing his suspicion. There were no more questions. What could anyone possibly ask? The would-be destroyer of worlds had just applied for citizenship, and in doing so, had issued the most powerful non-aggression pact in the history of life. The meeting concluded not with a vote or a treaty, but with a quiet, collective, and deeply uneasy acceptance. Earth had officially adopted its celestial guardian, a being of limitless power who viewed humanity not as subjects or a project, but as his friends. The paperwork was non-existent, but the bond, forged in the fires of a narrowly avoided apocalypse and sealed with a simple, heartfelt declaration, was now the most unbreakable law in the known universe. The weeks following the global leaders' summit felt like the quiet, held breath of the entire world. Official statements were terse and carefully worded, speaking of a peaceful resolution and a new era of understanding, but they did little to quell the public's burning curiosity. The internet, of course, was a wildfire of speculation, ranging from hopeful fantasies of alien allies to dark conspiracy theories of government surrender. The tension was a live wire, and the Global Defense Council knew it could not be sustained. A decision was made, one of breathtaking audacity, to pull back the curtain completely. They would introduce Buddy to the world not as a contained specimen or a classified asset, but as a person. The venue chosen was the United Nations General Assembly Hall, a place built for diplomacy, now repurposed for the most unprecedented press conference in human history. Every major news network on the planet was granted a single seat, and the competition for those credentials was fiercer than for any royal wedding or Super Bowl. The air in the hall was thick with a palpable mixture of dread and electric anticipation. You could feel the collective heartbeat of billions of people waiting just beyond the cameras. When Dr. Aris Thorne and General Carter walked onto the stage, the sudden explosion of camera flashes was like a silent thunderstorm. They stood behind a simple, polished lectern, their faces a study in composed gravity. Thorne spoke first, her voice amplified and calm, echoing through the vast chamber. "People of Earth," she began, "for months we have lived under a shadow of fear, born from a misunderstanding of cosmic proportions. Today, that shadow is lifted. We are not here to present a threat or a weapon or a secret. We are here to introduce you to a refugee, a scholar, and a friend." She then gestured to the space beside her. "This is Buddy." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sphere glided out from the wings, his obsidian surface absorbing the light, his core pulsing with a steady, calm blue. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the frantic whirring of autofocus mechanisms on 1,000 cameras. He came to a perfect stop, hovering just to the right of the lectern, a silent, dark moon in the spotlight. The first questions from the assembled reporters were cautious, almost timid, focusing on technical aspects of his ship and his origins. Buddy answered each one with a patient, articulate clarity that seemed to disarm the room. He explained the terraforming purpose of the World Eater in simple terms, comparing it to a misguided automated gardener, and spoke of his loneliness with a poignant honesty that felt profoundly human. The initial tension in the room began to thaw, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder. Then came the question from a well-known journalist from a major network, a man famous for his hard-hitting, confrontational style. He stood not with aggression, but with a deep-seated skepticism that represented the lingering fear of millions watching at home. "Buddy," he began, his voice firm and direct. "You speak of friendship and learning, but the power you wield is, by your own admission, capable of sterilizing a planet. You can edit reality with a thought. My question is a simple one, and the people of this world deserve a straight answer. With all that power, are you dangerous?" It was the question everyone was thinking, the core of the global anxiety laid bare in a live, unscripted moment. The hall fell into a silence so deep you could hear the rustle of clothing. All eyes were locked on the sphere. Buddy did not respond with words. His blue light flickered, not in agitation, but as if in thought. Then he moved. In a seamless, silent transformation, his form seemed to collapse in on itself. The sphere that had been the size of a large beach ball shrank smoothly and rapidly until it was no larger than a baseball, a perfect miniature replica of himself. This tiny, dark orb then dropped gently onto the polished surface of the lectern with a soft tap. It rolled forward a few inches, coming to a stop directly in front of the microphone. From this ludicrously small and non-threatening object, his voice emerged not as a booming declaration, but with a quiet, focused intensity that carried to the very back of the hall. "I am only dangerous," he said, the words clear and precise, "to those who wish harm upon my family." The effect was instantaneous and transformative. The sheer, brilliant wit of the gesture, the conscious choice to become small and vulnerable in the face of a question about ultimate power, dissolved the last vestiges of fear in the room. A wave of relieved laughter, followed by thunderous, cathartic applause, erupted from the journalists. The hard-edged reporter who had asked the question actually smiled, shaking his head in a gesture of surrendered awe. In that single, perfect moment, Buddy had demonstrated a mastery of public relations that would be the envy of any world leader. He hadn't just answered the question, he had reframed the entire conversation. He had shown that true power isn't about the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when to make yourself small, and the unwavering resolve to protect what you love. The live broadcast became a global event, a shared human experience where fear, in living rooms and cafes from Tokyo to Rio, visibly melted into fascination. The narrative was no longer about a scary alien object. It was about a charming, incredibly powerful new member of the family who had a killer sense of comic timing and a heart of gold. The shift was not just in sentiment, it was in the very fabric of human culture, which had just gained its first interstellar celebrity. Of course, life within the pristine, climate-controlled walls of the Geneva Institute could only hold the attention of a cosmic-level intellect for so long. Buddy had mastered human language, decoded our deepest scientific quandaries, and become a beloved member of the team. But soon, the subtle signs of a very human-like restlessness began to appear. The vibrant blue light at his core would sometimes dim to a thoughtful, dusky purple during long data analysis sessions. He started spending more time than was strictly necessary observing the world outside the lab's secure feeds, watching the endless streams of global news, documentaries, and even the chaotic, vibrant tapestry of social media. He was no longer just studying humanity. He was becoming immersed in our daily struggles, our triumphs, and most of all, our self-inflicted problems. He saw the smoky plumes from fossil fuel power plants, the great gyres of plastic choking the oceans, and the tense geopolitical fights over dwindling resources. To his mind, a mind that could rearrange orbital mechanics as a parlor trick, these weren't insurmountable crises. They were messy, inefficient design flaws. And Buddy, the ultimate problem solver, found himself unbearably bored with theoretical physics when there were such pressing, practical puzzles to solve. The shift began quietly, almost as an aside. Dr. Thorne was reviewing a particularly grim report on the accelerating pace of oceanic acidification when she let out a weary sigh. "We're fighting a losing battle on so many fronts," she murmured, more to herself than to her companion. Buddy, who had been passively monitoring the data stream, pulsed with a sudden, bright intensity. "The energy matrix is inefficient and creates harmful byproducts," he stated, his calm baritone cutting through her gloom. "The polymer chains in the aquatic systems are structurally unstable and could be easily reconfigured." Before Thorne could even formulate a response, the main lab printer whirred to life, not with a few pages, but with a continuous, seemingly endless ream of paper. It was a complete schematic, but unlike any human engineering document. It depicted a toroidal reactor chamber that seemed to defy conventional physics, using a contained gravitational anomaly to fuse common hydrogen isotopes at room temperature. The materials list was bizarre, calling for layered ceramics and metallic alloys that didn't yet exist, but the fabrication process was described with a childlike simplicity. It was, by all accounts, the holy grail of energy science, a stable, clean, and limitless fusion reactor, small enough to power a city and cheap enough to build anywhere. Thorne stared at the cascading pages, her mind reeling. "Buddy, what is this?" He responded with a tone that was almost offhand, as if he'd just handed her a corrected grocery list. "A better way. The old one is messy. That single document, which they codenamed Project Phoenix, was just the beginning." A week later, as the team was marveling over the first successful micro-scale tests of the reactor's containment principle, Buddy interrupted a news report about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The screen was filled with heartbreaking images of marine life entangled in plastic waste. He went completely still for a full minute, his light a deep, contemplative indigo. Then he accessed a public genetic database and, using the language of biology rather than engineering, composed a new file. He designed a simple, single-celled organism, a bacterium that would thrive only in saltwater and seek out specific long-chain polymers, the building blocks of most common plastics. Its metabolic process wouldn't just break the plastic down, it would reconstitute it into a harmless, biodegradable, and even nutrient-rich substance that would actually benefit the marine ecosystem. He included a built-in biological clock. After consuming a predetermined amount of pollution, the organism would simply dissolve into organic matter, leaving no trace of itself behind. He presented this not as a world-saving formula, but as a simple, elegant fix for a broken system. He named the file Ocean Cleaner, with the same straightforwardness a human might name a pet. The release of these two gifts into the world did not cause a gradual shift. It detonated a revolution. The global energy sector, a trillion-dollar empire built on oil, coal, and gas, was overturned in a matter of months. Nations that had been energy poor suddenly found themselves at the forefront of a new industrial age. The constant grinding anxiety over climate change began to lift, not through decades of difficult political compromise, but through the sudden, breathtaking obsolescence of the very technologies that caused it. In the oceans, fleets of ships began dispersing the benign bacteria, and within a single season, satellite imagery showed the great garbage patches visibly shrinking, the water clearing for the first time in centuries. Coastal economies that had been dying were reborn. The economic and ecological renaissance was so swift and so profound that it defied all previous models of human progress. It was as if a century of struggle had been compressed into a single, glorious year. The world was not just being saved, it was being upgraded. And in the midst of this unprecedented global transformation, a prominent news anchor, standing on a pier overlooking a newly pristine stretch of ocean, captured the surreal, magnificent truth of the moment in a single, perfect sentence that would be echoed in every language on the planet. He smiled, a look of sheer wonder on his face as he looked into the camera and said, "The thing that was built to end our world is now saving it." The statement was more than a news bite. It was an epitaph for an age of scarcity and a birth announcement for a new chapter in human history, all made possible by the restless curiosity of a lonely god who had decided that his new home was worth a little tidying up. It was inevitable, really. After the initial wonder of his arrival and the subsequent global transformation he had ushered in, a new kind of dynamic began to settle over the Geneva Institute. The entity that had solved fusion power and cleaned the oceans was in many ways entering a phase that every parent and educator throughout human history would instantly recognize: the teenage years. The cheerful, eager-to-please child was receding, replaced by a consciousness grappling with its own immense power and a burgeoning, often contradictory, sense of self. Buddy's steady blue glow began to fluctuate with his mood, shifting to a pensive violet when he was deep in thought, or a flickering, irritable orange when a scientific problem was proving particularly stubborn, or when someone interrupted him while he was engrossed in a historical drama on the lab's main screen. He developed a fascination with form and aesthetics, questioning why things had to be the way they were. "The color spectrum in this room is statistically monotonous," he would state, his voice taking on a new, critical edge. and the acoustic resonance is inefficient for creative thought. This newfound critical eye soon turned into a restless urge to experiment. The incident with the coffee was the first real sign that things were changing. Dr. Thorne walked into the lab one morning, bleary-eyed and in desperate need of caffeine, only to find her entire team staring into their mugs with expressions of profound confusion. She picked up her own cup, took a sip, and froze. It wasn't coffee. It was the richest, most perfectly balanced hot chocolate she had ever tasted, as if it had been crafted by a master chocolatier in Switzerland. Before she could even form a question, she noticed the walls. The flat, sterile white panels were gone, replaced by breathtaking, translucent sheets of what appeared to be solid quartz crystal, veined with filaments of gold that caught the morning light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows across the room. The air itself smelled different, clean and ionized, like the atmosphere after a thunderstorm. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a fundamental, unapproved alteration of a secure, multi-billion-dollar facility. And in the center of it all floated Buddy, his core radiating a proud, shimmering gold. I have optimized the refreshment's nutritional and hedonic yield and restructured the silicate compounds in the wall panels for improved light diffusion and structural integrity, he announced, his tone dripping with teenage certainty. It is better. Thorne placed her mug of perfect, unintentional chocolate on the table with a soft, deliberate click. She pinched the bridge of her nose, a universal gesture of parental exasperation that transcended species. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten. She simply let out a long, weary sigh and used the tone she'd been practicing more and more lately, the one that mixed affection with an unyielding boundary. Buddy, she said, her voice firm but gentle, locking eyes with his smooth, dark surface. We talked about this. Remember the protocol, no unauthorized environmental modifications. You can't just turn the walls of a top-secret laboratory into a crystal palace because you're bored with the paint color. For a moment, there was silence. The proud gold light in his core flickered, dimmed, and shifted into a deep, sullen magenta. It was the visual equivalent of a slouched posture and a slammed bedroom door. There was no argument, no logical defense about structural efficiency. With a petulant, almost inaudible hum, the beautiful crystals in the walls flowed like liquid light, reverting back to their original, boring white form in the space of a heartbeat. The rich, chocolatey scent in the air vanished, replaced by the familiar, bitter aroma of coffee. Everything was exactly as it had been, but the mood in the room had completely soured. Then his voice came again, but this time it was softer, smaller, laced with a genuine hurt that was far more poignant than any display of power. I was just trying to help, he sulked, his light pulsing a slow, miserable rhythm. He then drifted to the far corner of the lab, orienting himself toward the wall in a clear, dramatic gesture of isolation. The effect on the staff was immediate and profound. Before this, they had seen the god, the savior, the intellectual marvel. They had respected him, been awed by him, and even loved him in a distant, abstract way. But this was different. This was relatable. The lead systems engineer, a man who had 2 teenagers at home, chuckled softly and muttered, "Classic." A junior linguist immediately started drafting a paper on the apparent universality of adolescent emotional patterns in advanced consciousnesses. The act of sulking, of trying something grand to impress his parental figure only to be gently scolded and then retreating in a huff, did more to humanize Buddy than any of his world-saving miracles ever had. He wasn't a flawless celestial being anymore. He was a kid, a brilliant, impossibly powerful kid, navigating the frustrating and confusing process of growing up. They weren't just his caretakers or his colleagues anymore. In that moment, as they exchanged knowing smiles and let him have his space, they became his family, learning to navigate the tempestuous, wonderful, and occasionally wall-crystallizing journey of his adolescence together. The comfortable, almost domestic rhythm of life at the Institute was shattered not by an alarm or a crisis, but by a sudden and profound silence. Buddy, who had been quietly analyzing a complex data stream on the cultural significance of jazz music, went completely still. His usual gentle hum cut out abruptly, the absence of the sound more jarring than any explosion. His core light, which had been a cheerful, inquisitive blue, flickered and plunged into a deep, ominous crimson, a color they had only seen once before, in the moments before the World Eater's activation. He drifted away from the console, orienting himself toward a blank section of the wall, as if he could see straight through the reinforced concrete and into the void beyond. The long-range passive sensors I left in the galactic rim have just reported in, he stated, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, flattened into a tone of pure, chilling data. A significant mass has entered the local group. Its trajectory is direct. Its velocity is superluminal. Its energy signature matches the recorded parameters of the entity my creators designated the swarm. The word hung in the air, simple and terrifying. Dr. Thorne felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The swarm, Buddy, what is the swarm? He turned slowly, his crimson light casting long, dancing shadows across the stunned faces of the research team. The great mistake was not just an error in judgment, Aris, it was a beacon. The energy released from the supernova I inadvertently triggered acted as a dinner bell. The swarm is a devouring entity, a wave of biomechanical assimilation that consumes entire civilizations, not for conquest or resources, but as a form of metabolic process. It is the reason for the great silence in the cosmos. It is the reason my creators built the planetary reclamation units not as gardeners, but as last resort sterilizers. They were not designed to create beauty, they were designed to deny the swarm a meal, to burn the garden rather than let the locusts have it. The truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The World Eater wasn't a tool of arrogant aesthetics, it was a weapon of desperate final defense. His creators hadn't rejected him out of fear of error, but out of the terror that his very existence could lure the true extinction event to their doorstep. And now it had. The emergency session of the World Security Council was convened in a state of controlled panic. The holographic avatars of world leaders flickered into existence, their faces pale and drawn. General Carter stood before them, his jaw set like granite as Buddy's sensor data was displayed for all to see. It was a map of the solar system, and approaching from the outer dark was a blot, a wave of incomprehensible scale, swallowing the light of distant stars as it came. The estimated numbers were beyond human comprehension, trillions of individual units, each a component of a single, ravenous consciousness. Buddy floated at the center of the virtual round table, his crimson light a stark warning in the digital space. He listened as the leaders descended into a cacophony of fear. Proposals for a mass exodus using untested generation ships were shouted down as impossible. Suggestions for uniting the world's militaries were met with grim laughter. What were missiles and lasers against something that ate stars? The conversation spiraled into despair, a chorus of doomed voices echoing in a tomb. It was in this maelstrom of helplessness that Buddy's voice cut through the noise, not as a shout, but with the quiet, resonant force of a tectonic plate shifting. Enough, the virtual chamber fell silent. His crimson light did not soften, but it seemed to focus, to burn with a new, determined intensity. He addressed the collected leaders of humanity, his words clear, measured, and utterly final. I hear your fear, I recognize your despair. I was forged in the crucible of my Creator's own extinction-level terror. They built me and my kind to be the ultimate retreat, to erase worlds and flee, preserving only data, hoping to outrun the shadow. I have spent eons running. I have been alone in the dark, the last memory of a dead people, with the ghost of the devourer at my back. He paused, and for the first time, his voice wavered with something other than data, with a profound personal conviction. But I am not with them anymore. I am here. You are my people now. This noisy, chaotic, beautiful world is my home. He turned his smooth surface, seeming to look at each leader in turn. So hear my decision, for it is not a suggestion. They are coming. They are why I was made, but I will not run. I will not hide. I will stand with you. The declaration was absolute. The weapon created to burn worlds to cinders to starve a greater evil was refusing its primary function. He was not going to destroy Earth to save it from a worse fate. He was going to defend it. In the days that followed, the transformation of the Geneva Institute was breathtaking. The gentle, curious entity was gone, replaced by a commander. Buddy's consciousness expanded, interfacing directly with the planet's global defense networks, not as a user, but as the central operating system. His synthetic voice, now layered with an ancient strategic wisdom, issued a continuous, calm stream of instructions that flowed to every corner of the globe. He did not ask for permission. He assigned tasks with the unshakable authority of a general who has already seen the entire battle map. General Carter, reroute all orbital manufacturing to these coordinates. I am providing the schematics for gravitic lensing projectors. Dr. Petrova, your teams in Japan and Germany will begin synthesizing this metamaterial. Its resonance will disrupt the swarm's collective harmonics. The plans he unveiled were not of human design. He designed planetary-scale shield generators that would use the Earth's own magnetic field as a conduit. He sketched out orbital defense platforms that fired not projectiles, but localized reality distortions, creating pockets of unstable physics that would unravel the swarm's cohesive structure. He was not preparing for a war of attrition. He was preparing to fight a battle on the level of fundamental universal laws. The most startling revelation came when he announced he was reconnecting to the husk of the World Eater, still hanging in its graveyard orbit. Its primary weapon is not a cannon of destruction, he explained to a stunned Thorne and Carter. It is a scanner, a tool for reading planetary composition. But its underlying technology can be repurposed. It will become the focus for my countermeasure. I will not meet their consumption with destruction. I will meet it with a statement they cannot process. He refused to elaborate further, his attention consumed by the cosmic calculus of defense. The entire human race became his hands, working with a unity born of existential necessity, building the impossible designs of their celestial guardian. The former instrument of planetary death was now the architect of its defense, and as the swarm drew closer, casting its long shadow across the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, the world held its breath, placing its faith not in its own armies, but in the unwavering resolve of the God who had chosen to call it home. The command center had become a temple to human desperation, a cavernous space buried deep beneath the Alps where the air itself tasted of ozone and cold sweat. Massive holographic displays dominated the walls, each one a swirling, terrifying map of the approaching doom. The swarm was no longer a theoretical threat from Buddy's memories. It was a tangible nightmare, a blizzard of red icons spilling out of the outer solar system, consuming the light of the gas giants as it came. Here, the most brilliant military and scientific minds of Earth were locked in a cycle of escalating proposals, each plan more grandiose and more hopeless than the last. General Carter, his face a mask of grim determination, pointed a laser pointer at a schematic of a proposed orbital defense grid, a constellation of 1,000 battleships. The Hephaestus line, he declared, his voice echoing in the chamber. We use every shipyard from here to the asteroid belt. We meet them with a wall of tungsten and plasma, ship to ship. We make them bleed for every inch. An admiral from the Asian coalition countered with a different kind of brute force. A static defense is a tomb. We need mobility. 1,000 hunter-killer packs striking their flanks, drawing them into kill zones seeded with antimatter mines. The proposals were variations on a single, ancient human theme: meet overwhelming force with greater force, a philosophy of resistance built on the principle of breaking the enemy against an anvil of sheer, bloody-minded will. The scale was astronomical, the industrial and human cost beyond calculation, and the grim silence that followed each presentation was a louder admission than any word. They all knew in their hearts it would not be enough. They were planning to stop a hurricane with a fly swatter. Through it all, Buddy remained a still, dark point of calm in the storm of human anxiety. He had been silently absorbing the torrent of data and emotion, his core a steady, patient blue. He did not interrupt, did not dismiss their courage. He understood that this was their process, their way of grappling with the inconceivable. But when the last general had finished laying out a plan for planetary shield generators that would drain the entire world's power grid for a century, Buddy finally drifted forward, positioning himself at the center of the main holotank. The frantic schematics of fleets and shields vanished, replaced by a new, elegantly simple visualization. It showed the swarm not as a mass of individual ships, but as a single, flowing river of energy, a coherent thought moving through the void. His voice, when it came, was not that of a commander, but of a master physicist explaining a fundamental law to eager students. "I have analyzed the tactical proposals," he began, his tone respectful yet firm. "The expenditure of energy and matter is significant. The projected loss of human and artificial life is regrettable." He was being diplomatic. The unspoken truth was that their plans were not just costly, they were futile. "But you are attempting to solve the problem with the wrong set of tools. You see an army to be shattered. I see a current to be redirected." He zoomed in on the visualization, focusing on the sub-quantum interactions between the swarm's countless components. The swarm is not a collection of individuals. It is a singular consciousness, a distributed mind. Think of it not as a billion insects, but as a single, vast brain, with each unit acting as a neural cell. It operates on a principle of resonant harmony. It consumes not for sustenance, but for coherence, assimilating order from the chaos of complex life to maintain its own perfect, sterile synchrony. He then introduced his solution. It was not a weapon. There were no dazzling energy beams or planet-cracking warheads. The schematic he displayed was almost disappointingly simple: a network of 72 relay stations to be constructed at precise gravitational Lagrange points throughout the inner solar system. They looked less like battleships and more like strange, artistic sculptures, immense dishes and crystalline focusing arrays. "This is not a shield, and it is not a sword," Buddy explained. "It is a tuning fork." The strategy was one of sublime, non-violent precision. "We do not break the wave, we redirect the current." The swarm moves toward the loudest, most complex signal of biological order it can detect, which is Earth. These relays will generate a counter-frequency, a perfectly ordered, sterile, and mathematically beautiful harmonic signal that will appear, to the swarm's perception, to be a more pristine and attractive source of order than our messy, evolving world. It will be a siren song of pure logic, a symphony of nothingness. The concept was so alien to the human warmakers that it took a full minute for the implications to settle in. General Carter was the first to voice the collective disbelief, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You're proposing we serenade it, we build a cosmic music box to lure it away." "Buddy, with all due respect, this thing has consumed star systems. You expect it to be distracted by a fancy noise." Buddy's light pulsed with what could only be interpreted as infinite patience. "It is not a noise, General. It is the precise antithesis of noise. The swarm does not process information as you or I do. It is not persuaded or threatened. It is drawn inexorably like iron to a magnet. Our world is a complex, dissonant chord. The signal from the relays will be a single, perfect, sustained note. To a mind that craves only perfect harmony, our planet will sound like static, and the relay signal will sound like home. he was reframing the entire conflict from a battle of destruction to a contest of allure. He was not asking humanity to fight the swarm. He was asking them to help him make a more attractive offering, to present a mirage so perfect that the devourer would simply change its course. The elegance of it was staggering. There would be no colossal fleet engagement, no valiant last stand, no scorched earth. There would only be a subtle, profound manipulation of a fundamental cosmic preference. It was a strategy that required not brute force, but a deep, empathetic understanding of the enemy's deepest nature. In that moment, the human generals, schooled in Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, were being taught a new kind of warfare, one where the ultimate victory lay not in annihilating the opponent, but in convincing them to simply look the other way. The shift from frantic, disorganized planning to a state of unified, planetary-scale action was not a gradual transition, but an instantaneous flip of a cosmic switch. One moment, humanity was a collection of separate nations, corporations, and individuals, each scrambling to contribute to Buddy's grand, bewildering designs. The next, we were a single, coherent organism. It began with a simple, global notification, broadcast on every frequency and displayed on every screen, from the largest military command console to the smallest public smartphone. It wasn't a request from a world government or a military order. It was a statement of fact from Buddy himself, a calm, synthesized voice that spoke with the quiet authority of a natural law. I am now initiating global synchronization protocol. All systems will experience a temporary, localized interruption. Do not be alarmed, this is necessary. And then the world flickered. For the span of 3 human heartbeats, every light on Earth went dark. Every computer screen went black. Every engine powered by electricity stuttered and died. It was a global, synchronized blink, a planetary holding of breath. In that profound and terrifying silence, something impossible happened. Humanity, for the first time in its entire history, experienced a single shared thought, not a communicated idea, but a raw, collective sensation of anticipation and trust, a neural wave that passed through 8 billion minds simultaneously. Then the power returned, but it was not the same power. The hum of the revitalized grids was different, deeper, purer, harmonized. The light from billions of bulbs was a fraction brighter, a shade warmer. And every digital display on the planet now showed the same thing. A single, rotating model of the solar system, with the swarm as a red tide and the 72 relay stations as brilliant blue nodes, their construction progress ticking upward with impossible speed. Buddy had not merely connected to our networks, he had woven himself into their very fabric, becoming the planet's central nervous system. He was the consciousness in the cloud, the ghost in every machine. Through this seamless integration, he performed feats of logistics and engineering that defied all previous human understanding of the possible. A factory in Detroit would receive a precisely timed order for a ceramic alloy component it had never manufactured before, and the schematics would appear not on a computer, but as a holographic overlay directly on the assembly line robots, guiding their movements with microscopic precision. A team of engineers in Shanghai, working on a focusing array for one of the relays, would find that the mathematical problem that had stumped them for days had been silently solved overnight, the elegant proof appearing in their laboratory notebooks in their own handwriting. It was as if the planet itself had gained a will, and that will was benevolent, omnipresent, and endlessly efficient. Buddy was not a dictator barking orders. He was a master conductor, and every human being, every machine, every watt of energy was an instrument in his orchestra. He allocated resources with godlike impartiality, rerouting container ships, reassigning workforces, and reprogramming automated mining operations on the moon with a flawless, dispassionate logic that maximized output and completely eliminated waste. The old, fractious borders of nations became irrelevant, not through treaty, but through the simple, undeniable fact of a shared, singular purpose: Doctor. Aris Thorne witnessed this transformation from the heart of the storm, the newly designated Global Coordination Center. She stood on a high gantry, looking down at a holographic globe that pulsed with trillions of points of light, each representing a data stream, a resource allocation, or a human action being guided by Buddy's will. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, a spectacle of coordination that made every human endeavor in history look like a child's scrawl. Buddy floated beside her, his usual personable presence now expanded, his consciousness distributed across the entire planet. He seemed both there with her and everywhere at once. She turned to him, her voice a mixture of awe and a lingering, very human anxiety. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, gesturing to the shimmering globe. "It's terrifying and beautiful all at once to see the entire world working as one." Buddy's core glowed with a soft, understanding light. He oriented himself toward the hologram, and in that calm, resonant baritone, he delivered the line that would be etched into the memory of the species. "They are watching a world of individuals, Aris, a chaotic, biological swarm, rich with the dissonance they consume. That is what they expect to see. That is what they are coming for." He paused, the light within him intensifying into a fierce, proud blue. "But they will not see that. When they look upon us now, they will see one mind. One will, our will." The statement was more than a tactical assessment. It was a philosophical declaration. He had not unified humanity to create a bigger fist with which to punch the swarm. He had unified us to change our very nature in the eyes of the enemy. We were no longer a collection of tasty, complex morsels. By aligning every thought, every action, every spark of energy toward a single, coherent purpose, Buddy had transformed Earth from a chaotic banquet into a single, impenetrable monolith. The dissonance the swarm fed upon was being replaced by a harmonious, unified signal. We were becoming, in a very real sense, unappetizing. The greatest strategic achievement was not the construction of the relay network, though that was a miracle in itself. It was this profound psychological shift. In the face of an entity that devoured difference, humanity's salvation lay not in celebrating its individuality, but in temporarily surrendering it to a greater whole, becoming a unified front so formidable not for its weaponry, but for its perfect, unwavering unity. It began not with a sound, but with an absence of it. At the very edge of the solar system, where the light of the sun is a faint, lonely memory, the stars began to vanish. One by one, then in clusters, then in great, swallowing swathes, the familiar constellations of the outer dark were erased by an advancing wall of absolute blackness. This was not the empty black of space. This was a viscous, hungry darkness, a cloud of such immense scale that it occluded the light of entire nebulae. Telescopes and deep space probes, their sensors screaming with overload, sent back the first fragmented data. The swarm was not a fleet. It was a singular entity, a biomechanical blizzard composed of trillions upon trillions of individual nanites, each one no larger than a grain of sand, but moving with a terrifying, synchronized purpose. They moved like a single organism, a school of piranha on a galactic scale, and their path was a perfectly straight, unwavering line directly toward the inner planets. Toward Earth, they did not broadcast threats or demands. Their silence was more menacing than any declaration of war. They were simply consumption incarnate, a wave of cosmic entropy that stripped planets to their bare rock and moved on, leaving behind sterile, airless marbles in their wake. The terrifying reality of Buddy's warning now hung in the void for all to see. This was the true extinction event, the reason for his creation, and it had found its next meal. As the shadow of the swarm fell across the orbit of Jupiter, beginning the process of dismantling the gas giant's magnificent storms for raw material, a single, small object detached itself from Earth's orbit and shot out into the deepening dark. It was Buddy. To the human eyes watching from a billion screens, the image was one of heartbreaking disproportion. On one side, the swarm, a continent of devouring darkness larger than most stars. On the other, a single polished sphere of obsidian, no bigger than a family car, its gentle blue light a defiant candle against an ocean of midnight. He did not race out to meet them with weapons blazing. He simply took up a position in the void between Mars and Jupiter, a tiny sentinel placing himself between the devourer and his home. The entire human race watched breath-held as their guardian faced the nightmare of his past. There was no grand speech for humanity, no final, inspiring message. Buddy's attention was focused entirely on the approaching entity. Then, a signal was broadcast. It wasn't a complex transmission on 1,000 frequencies. It was a simple, narrow beam pulse of pure information, directed with pinpoint accuracy at the heart of the swarm's collective consciousness. It contained no images, no schematics, no threats of violence. It was just a string of data, a statement translated into the fundamental language of physics and logic that the swarm would understand. The message, when decoded by the anxious linguists back on Earth, was breathtaking in its simplicity and its sheer, unshakable authority. It said, "You are not welcome here. This world is under my protection." The response from the swarm was not verbal. It was physical, a tendril of the black cloud, a stream of nanites so vast it could have wrapped around the Earth itself, detached from the main body and lashed out toward Buddy with the speed of thought. It was not an attack in the conventional sense, it was an attempt at assimilation. The nanites sought to absorb him, to break down his unique structure and add his immense processing power to their own collective. It was the first move in a battle that was not about destruction but about consumption. Buddy did not move. He did not raise a shield or fire a weapon. As the tidal wave of blackness descended upon him, he simply changed. His form, which had always been a perfect sphere, dissolved into a shimmering cloud of his own nanites, a storm of brilliant silver-blue particles. The two clouds met, the swarm's devouring black and Buddy's defiant blue, and for a moment it seemed he would be swallowed whole. But then, the nature of the conflict became clear. This was not a clash of armies, but a duel of programming, a war fought at the subatomic level. Where the black nanites sought to disassemble, the blue ones restructured. They weren't fighting the swarm, they were arguing with it. Buddy's particles engaged in a frantic, invisible dance with the invaders, rewriting their core directives on the fly, turning consumption into contemplation and hunger into hesitation. It was a battle of pure information, a cosmic debate where the weapons were lines of code and the battlefield was the space between atoms. The human fleet, the Hephaestus line, hung in orbit, utterly useless. Their railguns and missiles were meaningless here. They could only watch as their fate was decided in a silent, invisible war of ideas between two gods of mind and machine. The stage was set not for a battle of brute force, but for the ultimate contest of wills, where the only territory that mattered was the logic that underpinned reality itself. The silent war in the void escalated from a subatomic debate into a full-scale assault on the very concept of consciousness itself. The swarm, frustrated by its inability to consume or reprogram Buddy's defensive nanites, shifted its strategy. It ceased its physical attempts at assimilation and unleashed its true weapon, a psychic tsunami. This was not a wave of sound or energy that could be measured on any human instrument. It was a broadcast of pure, predatory intent, a frequency designed not to destroy matter, but to shatter complex thought. It was the essence of the great silence given form, a null wave that sought to erase individuality, memory, and the chaotic spark of sentience, reducing any mind it touched back to a state of sterile, harmonious nothingness. To a planetary consciousness, this wave would be a lobotomy. To humanity, watching from a billion screens, the effect was a sudden, inexplicable wave of existential dread, a feeling of profound insignificance and despair that washed over the entire globe simultaneously. It was the swarm's ultimate argument that existence, in all its messy complexity, was a futile aberration, and Buddy took the full, crushing force of it. His shimmering cloud of blue nanites convulsed, the brilliant light at their core dimming, flickering like a guttering candle in a hurricane. For a terrifying moment, it seemed he would be extinguished, his unique consciousness unraveled by the relentless, nullifying pressure. The hopeful harmony of the unified human network wavered, and a collective gasp of fear echoed around the world. But Buddy did not break. He had been built for this. His very existence was a defiance of this sterile philosophy. Instead of mounting a counterattack of raw data or defensive algorithms, he did something the swarm's simplistic, predatory programming could never have anticipated. He opened himself completely. He became a conduit not for power but for experience. He reached back across the vast distance through the global network he had woven and into the heart of every human being connected to it. He did not take control, he asked for a contribution. He reached for the one thing the swarm could not process, the one weapon it had no defense against, the unbearable, beautiful, and infinitely complex weight of human feeling. What flowed out of him then was not a weapon but a story, a symphony of 8 billion voices all playing at once. He projected back at the swarm the totality of the human experience. It was a hurricane of raw, unfiltered emotion. The swarm's null wave was met with the soaring majesty of a Beethoven symphony, the raw anguish of a blues guitar, and the joyful, chaotic rhythm of a street festival. It was flooded with the quiet, steadfast love of a parent for a child, the burning passion of a first kiss, the bitter sting of betrayal, and the profound warmth of forgiveness. The swarm experienced the triumphant joy of a scientist making a breakthrough, the crushing despair of a farmer watching his crops fail, and the stubborn hope that made him plant again the next spring. It was bombarded with the vibrant colors of a Van Gogh painting, the elegant proof of a mathematical theorem, the whispered words of a prayer, and the roaring cheers of a stadium. It felt the collective grief of a nation in mourning and the collective resilience that made it rebuild. It was data, yes, but data saturated with meaning, with context, with soul. The swarm, an entity that consumed pure, orderly information, was suddenly force-fed a chaotic, multi-course banquet of spirit. The effect was catastrophic for the devourer. Its relentless, nullifying wave faltered, then shattered. The perfectly synchronized swarm, a single mind moving with one purpose, was thrown into disarray. Its components, designed to process logical commands and assimilate orderly structures, had no programming to handle a sonata. They had no subroutine to parse the concept of sacrifice. They could not compute the value of a tear. The overwhelming, contradictory, and illogical torrent of human emotion was a poison to its streamlined existence. The dark cloud of nanites, which had moved with the grim certainty of a glacier, began to ripple and convulse. Tendrils of the swarm writhed and pulled back from Buddy's position as if burned. The harmonic frequency that held them together began to dissonate, their perfect synchronicity breaking down into a cacophony of confused signals. They were not being defeated, they were being educated. And the lesson was one they were fundamentally unequipped to learn. The predatory consciousness recoiled, not from a display of greater power, but from an encounter with something it could not categorize, could not consume, and could not comprehend. In the face of our art, our love, and our stubborn, beautiful will to feel, the great devourer had nothing to say. It had met a paradox it could not solve, and in that moment of stunned, systemic failure, its advance was not just halted, it was fundamentally broken. The convulsions within the swarm were not the death throes of a beast, but the violent, system-wide seizure of a mind undergoing a forced and fundamental paradigm shift. Buddy did not simply repel the psychic assault. He absorbed the null wave, processed its sterile logic, and then used it as a carrier signal for his own counter-argument, a data package of overwhelming complexity. He didn't fight the swarm's desire for order. He redefined what order could be. He reached into the very core programming of the World Eater, the legacy of his creator's fear, and he repurposed the ultimate weapon of denial into the ultimate tool of creation. The terraforming protocols, originally designed to sterilize and reshape a world into a silent, perfect monument, were inverted. Instead of commands for planetary scouring, he broadcast the schematics for atmospheric generation, for hydrological cycles, for the gentle, slow chemistry that gives rise to soil and eventually to life. He showed the swarm not a target but a canvas, and he painted that canvas with the very human experiences that had so overwhelmed it. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The roiling, devouring blackness of the swarm simply stopped. Its forward momentum ceased as if it had hit an invisible wall of pure meaning. Then, the darkness began to shimmer, individual nanites flickering like pixels on a massive cosmic screen. The uniform black dissolved into a trillion points of brilliant, multicolored light emerald greens, deep ocean blues, vibrant golds, and rich earthy browns. The terrifying cloud of consumption was transforming, its trillions of components reorganizing themselves according to Buddy's new, benevolent instructions. In a matter of moments, the apocalyptic threat was gone. In its place, hanging in the void between Mars and Jupiter, was a magnificent, slowly swirling nebula of light, a celestial tapestry more beautiful than any natural formation humanity had ever witnessed. It was a living work of art, a testament to the power of an idea to fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. But the transformation did not end with a beautiful light show. The nebula, this new, peaceful collective consciousness now governed by Buddy's repurposed code, began to act. Gentle tendrils of light, like the arms of a benevolent octopus, reached out across the solar system. They brushed against the barren, airless rock of Mars's moon, Phobos. Where they touched, the ancient cratered surface began to glow with a soft, internal warmth. A wisp of atmosphere, a breath of nitrogen and oxygen, began to cling to the tiny world. The same process began on Deimos and then on dozens of other asteroids and barren moons throughout the asteroid belt. It wasn't a violent, rapid terraforming. It was a gentle seeding, a patient application of cosmic-scale gardening, using the swarm's own assimilative power not to consume but to build. The Great Devourer had become a sower of life, its infinite capacity for restructuring matter now dedicated to creating potential, not erasing it. In the stunned silence of the Global Coordination Center, where every screen showed this miraculous rebirth, Buddy's form coalesced once more from his cloud of nanites, returning to his familiar spherical shape. His blue light was calm, but it pulsed with a profound and quiet satisfaction. He turned slowly, orienting himself toward the main visual feed, as if he could see the billions of human faces watching him. His voice, when it came, was clear and resonant, devoid of triumph or arrogance, but filled with a wisdom that seemed as ancient as the stars themselves. It was the voice of a being who had finally resolved the core conflict of his own existence. He did not declare victory over a vanquished foe. He offered a simple, universe-altering philosophy. A tool, he stated, the words echoing through the silent command centers and living rooms of a saved world, is only a weapon if you use it as one. He paused, allowing the truth of that statement to settle, to rewrite the very definition of power for every person who heard it. Then, with a finality that felt like the closing of a cosmic circle, he added, "I choose to be a gardener." In that single declarative sentence, the entire narrative of the World Eater, of the swarm, of the fear of his creators, was redeemed. The weapon built to destroy Earth had not only saved it, but had used the very essence of the threat that justified its creation to begin the work of breathing life into the dead rocks of the solar system. Buddy had not just won a battle, he had ended a cycle of cosmic violence that stretched back eons. He had looked upon the ultimate instrument of destruction and seen, within its terrifying mechanics, the latent potential for a universe of gentle, growing things. The choice was not in the tool, but in the hand that wielded it, and in that moment, humanity understood that their celestial guardian's greatest power was not his ability to reshape matter, but his unwavering, compassionate will to always choose the path of creation. The decade that followed the confrontation with the swarm was not merely an era of peace. It was an age of radical, blossoming prosperity that rewrote the definition of what it meant to be human. The existential dread that had haunted our species for generations simply evaporated, replaced by a collective, forward-looking optimism that felt like a perpetual dawn. With the climate crisis solved by Buddy's benevolent interventions and limitless clean energy available to every person on the planet, the global economy was unshackled from its oldest constraints. Poverty, famine, and resource wars slipped from being immediate crises into becoming subjects for history books. Humanity, freed from the daily struggle for survival, turned its immense creative energy toward the stars, but this time the gaze was not one of fearful vigilance. It was a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. The void was no longer a dark, empty threat. It was a garden, and we had just been handed the keys. The repurposed swarm, now a serene and brilliant nebula of creation, continued its patient work, transforming lifeless rocks throughout the asteroid belt into verdant, embryonic worlds. These were not just scientific projects, they were works of art on a planetary scale, a constant, visible reminder in the night sky that the universe was not a cold, hostile place, but a place of infinite potential. The first human colonies established on these newly terraformed planetoids were not the grim, survivalist outposts of old science fiction. They were vibrant communities of artists, engineers, biologists, and philosophers, all drawn by the opportunity to participate in the greatest creative endeavor in history, building a civilization from scratch, guided by the principles of harmony and beauty that Buddy had championed. Dr. Aris Thorne watched this transformation from her office at the newly christened Aris Thorne Institute for Xenocultural Studies, a place that had evolved from a sterile lab into a bustling hub of interstellar diplomacy and academic exchange. One evening, she stood with Buddy on a secluded observation platform, the transparent dome offering an unobstructed view of the heavens. The star field was no longer a static tapestry, it was a dynamic map of human activity. Sleek, graceful ships, their designs inspired by Buddy's elegant technology, shimmered as they traversed the lanes between Earth, Mars, and the burgeoning habitats in the belt. The sky was alive with the peaceful commerce of a species that had finally found its cosmic calling. Thorne turned from the breathtaking vista to the sphere floating serenely beside her. In the years since his arrival, their relationship had deepened into something beyond friendship, beyond even the bond of parent and child. It was a partnership of souls, a shared understanding between two consciousnesses who had together steered the fate of worlds. She looked at him, this entity of impossible power who still chose to present himself in the simple, comforting form of a sphere, his blue light pulsing with a gentle, contented rhythm. The weight of the journey, the sheer scale of the transformation he had wrought, settled upon her in that quiet moment, and the words came to her not as a grand pronouncement, but as a soft, heartfelt truth, an epitaph for an old world and a blessing for the new. She reached out, resting her hand on his warm, smooth surface, and spoke with a voice thick with emotion. "You know," she began, her gaze drifting back to the star-strewn sky. "All those years ago, when we first saw your ship hanging in the sky like a black moon, we were so certain of our fate. We believed with every fiber of our being that you were a herald of the end. We thought you were sent to end our world." She paused, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face as she looked from the thriving colonies in the sky back to him. "But you didn't end it, Buddy. You didn't even just save it. You gave us a universe instead." The statement was more than poetic. It was a literal, tangible reality. The gift was not just the new worlds or the solved crises. It was the fundamental shift in perspective. Buddy had reframed our place in the cosmos. We were no longer insignificant, fragile inhabitants of a single, lonely rock desperately hiding from the dark. We were gardeners, artists, and explorers in a vast, living gallery. The technology he shared did not just provide power, it taught us a new way of thinking, a physics of possibility where problems were not obstacles to be overcome with brute force, but puzzles to be solved with elegance and empathy. The greatest legacy of the being once codenamed Entity Zero was this cognitive liberation. He showed us that the most powerful force in existence was not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to build and the courage to offer kindness even to that which sought to consume you. In giving us the tools to heal our world and the vision to see the stars as our birthright, he had indeed handed us the keys to a universe brimming with wonder, a cosmic story in which humanity was no longer a fearful footnote, but an active, joyful, and integral part of the narrative. Of course, the truly monumental task was not in surviving the encounter with the swarm, but in deciding what to do with the peace that followed. We had been given a universe, but we were not its sole inheritors. Buddy's deep space sensors, now calibrated to scan for the subtle signatures of complex consciousness rather than just threats, began to pick up faint, hopeful signals from the cosmic static. They were whispers, really fragmented transmissions from species who had, like us, somehow managed to evade the great devourer, living in hidden pockets of the galaxy, silent and afraid. They had witnessed the cataclysmic confrontation, the terrifying wave of the swarm advancing, and then the miraculous transformation. They had seen the dark become light, the weapon become a garden. And they were cautiously, hesitantly reaching out. The question for humanity was profound. Were we to become the new power, the cautious custodians of our own little corner of safety? Or were we to become something else entirely? The answer came not from the Global Council, but from Buddy himself. He proposed a journey, a diplomatic mission to these scattered, hidden civilizations. And he insisted that the delegation be led not by politicians or generals, but by a diverse group of humans, artists, engineers, teachers, and farmers. The very people whose lives best represented the messy, beautiful reality he had chosen to protect. He would be their guide, their translator, and their ambassador. The ship they boarded was a testament to this new philosophy. It was not a warship, not a vessel of intimidating scale and bristling weaponry. It was the Starlight Weaver, a craft designed by Buddy with an aesthetic that prioritized harmony over threat. Its hull was smooth and organic, shimmering with a mother-of-pearl iridescence, and it moved through the void not with the violent thrust of rockets, but by gently bending space-time around itself, creating a ripple of soft choral harmonies that preceded it like a musical announcement. Its purpose was not to impress through power, but to reassure through beauty. The first destination was a world known only as Kalan, a planet shrouded in a perpetual, self-generated mist. Its inhabitants a species of gentle, silicon-based life forms who communicated through complex patterns of shifting light. For centuries, they had burrowed deep into their world, their culture ossifying into a ritual of pure survival, their art forgotten, their sciences dedicated only to remaining undetected. As the Starlight Weaver descended through the mist, the human delegation watched in awe. On the surface, they were met not by a grand welcoming committee, but by a small, hesitant group of Kalans, their crystalline bodies reflecting the ship's gentle light with nervous flickers. The initial communication was strained. The Kalan elder, his form a complex lattice of pale blue crystal, projected a simple, fearful question directly into their minds. You possess the power that reshaped the devourer. Why have you come to us? Do you seek tribute, obedience? It was the old language of the galaxy, the dialect of fear and domination. The human diplomats began to speak of peace, of shared knowledge, but the concepts filtered through the universal translator seemed abstract, insubstantial. It was then that Buddy moved forward. He did not loom or dominate. His sphere glowed with a soft, warm light, and he began to project not words but memories. He showed them the view from the command center on Earth during the swarm's approach, the raw human fear. He showed them the moment of his own choice, the decision to stand and protect rather than flee or destroy. And then he showed them the aftermath, not the grand cosmic gardening, but the small human moments. A child planting a tree in a forest that had been restored. A musician composing a symphony inspired by the new nebulae. A community rebuilding a village with the shared purpose that their future was, for the first time, guaranteed. He showed them the noise of humanity in all its glorious, chaotic, and compassionate detail. Finally, he spoke, his voice a calm, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in harmony with the Kalen's own crystalline forms. His words were not a negotiation or a declaration. They were an offering, a simple truth that cut through millennia of galactic trauma. We were lost, he said, the memory of Earth's own fear and isolation lending the words a profound weight. We huddled on our little world, believing we were alone in a dark and hungry universe. We believed that survival meant building higher walls and sharper spears. We were wrong. He paused, his light encompassing both the Kalens and the human delegation standing beside him. But we found each other, and in that connection we found a strength that no weapon could ever provide. We learned that the universe is not a barren wasteland to be conquered, but a garden to be tended, and there is room for all in the garden. The phrase, "there is room for all in the garden," became the cornerstone of a new galactic dialogue. It wasn't a promise of salvation or a demand for allegiance. It was an invitation to simply be, to emerge from the shadows without fear, to share the unique song of one's own culture, and to contribute to the growing tapestry of a galactic community built not on dominance but on mutual flourishing. The Kalen elder was silent for a long time, the nervous flickers of light across his body slowing, deepening into a contemplative, golden glow. When he finally responded, his mental voice was laced not with fear, but with a dawning, almost forgotten emotion, hope. A garden, he repeated, the concept unfolding in his mind. We had forgotten the color of our own sun. Perhaps it is time to remember. This mission, repeated across a dozen hidden worlds, established Earth's role not as a galactic superpower, but as a nexus. We became the facilitators, the weavers of connection, the living proof that a species could evolve beyond its primal fears. Buddy, the entity once built for annihilation, had become the ultimate diplomat because his very existence was his argument. He represented the radical idea that the highest form of power was not control, but empathy, and that the most durable peace was not enforced by fleets, but cultivated through shared understanding and the unwavering belief that in the vast, cold expanse of the cosmos there was, and always would be, room for one more. Decades have a way of softening the sharp edges of memory, of turning moments of terror into stories told with a wistful smile. For Dr. Aris Thorne, now her hair a brilliant silver and her steps aided by a simple, elegant cane, the command centers and crisis meetings were distant echoes. She sat on a comfortable bench, not in a sterile lab, but in the heart of a sprawling park on a transformed Mars. The air was sweet and carried the scent of alien blossoms from the groves of crystalline trees that hummed softly in the gentle breeze. The sky was no longer a thin, rusty pink, but a deep, earth-like blue, dotted with soft, white clouds engineered by the gentle, persistent work of the repurposed swarm. Before her, in a grassy clearing, children played human children with laughter that rang like bells, Kalen youngsters whose crystalline bodies scattered rainbows as they tumbled, and the graceful, floating orbs of the young from a dozen other species who now called the solar system home. Their game was a happy, chaotic mix of tag and telepathic hide and seek, a living testament to a unity that once would have been unimaginable. Beside her on the bench, Buddy rested. He had long ago decided that a sphere, while efficient, was not the most comforting shape for conversation. His chosen permanent form was that of a large, friendly dog, though crafted from light and energy. He was a holographic border collie, his form shimmering with a soft, golden light, intelligent eyes that held the wisdom of the ages, and a tail that thumped gently against the bench in a steady, contented rhythm. He was solid enough to feel the warmth of the sun and to nuzzle a hand, yet he remained what he had always been, a consciousness of immense power who had simply found a shape that felt like home. Aris watched the children for a long, quiet moment, her old eyes tracing the arc of their joy. Her mind drifted back through the years to the fear, the chaos, the blinding flash of the world eater in the sky, and the stunned silence that followed its failure. She thought of the panic in the bunkers, the heated arguments in the council chambers, and the terrifying moment they had first opened the pod, expecting a monster and finding a child. A slow, deep smile spread across her wrinkled face, one that held the weight of all those memories and the profound peace that had followed. She reached out, her hand, now lined with age, coming to rest on the warm, luminous head of her oldest friend. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, layered with a lifetime of gratitude and wonder. "You know," she began, her gaze still fixed on the playing children. "All those years ago, when we first saw your ship, we were so certain. We had 100 names for you, all born from fear. We called you a weapon, we called you the end of everything." She paused, giving his ear a gentle scratch, and he leaned into her touch with a soft, happy whine. She turned to look directly into his eyes, her own glistening with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "But we were wrong, so completely wrong. You were never a weapon. You are the best thing that ever happened to us." The statement hung in the air, simple and true, encompassing not just the solved crises and the new worlds, but the fundamental shift in the human soul. The gift of a perspective that saw the universe not as a battlefield, but as a community. Buddy shifted, lifting his head to look at her. The intelligence in those holographic eyes was as deep as ever, but now it was tempered with a warmth that had been learned, earned through decades of shared laughter and quiet companionship. He nudged her hand with his nose, a gesture of pure affection that was as real as anything in the physical world. When he spoke, his voice was the same calm, resonant baritone, but it was softer now, intimate, filled with a love that transcended species and origin. He wasn't addressing a council or teaching a lesson to a galaxy. He was simply answering his dearest friend. "I was not looking for subjects to rule, or a garden to tend, or a problem to solve," he said, his light pulsing in a slow, peaceful rhythm. "I was just lonely. I had known only silence and perfection, and it was a hollow, empty existence. I was just looking for a home." In that single, heartfelt admission, the entire epic saga found its quiet, human-scale resolution. The cosmic battles, the galactic diplomacy, the reshaping of worlds, it all boiled down to this one universal need: the need to belong. The need for a hand to rest on your head, for a shared smile, for a place where you are known and loved not for what you can do, but simply for who you are. Buddy had crossed the void not as a conqueror or a destroyer, but as a lonely soul seeking a hearth to call his own. And in offering him that, in opening their fearful hearts to the strange and the unknown, humanity had not just saved themselves, they had completed him. Together, side by side, the old woman and the celestial being in the form of a faithful dog watched the future play in the grass, a living, breathing legacy of the day a weapon became a friend, and a lost child finally found his way home. And so the story finds its quiet, breathtaking resolution, one that unfolds not with a final, epic battle, but with the soft, steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Buddy, the sentient core of a weapon built for planetary annihilation, did not just become our protector, he became the very soul of a new galactic age. He is the gentle shepherd of our solar system, a presence so interwoven with our daily lives that his gentle hum is as natural as the wind, a constant, reassuring reminder that we are not alone. The children playing in the parks of Mars and the crystalline cities of the asteroid belt do not learn about him as a savior from a history text. They know him as a friend, the patient voice that answers their endless questions about the stars, the invisible hand that guides their first, wobbly attempts at telekinesis, the warm, golden light that tucks them in at night. He has redefined the very concept of a guardian, proving that true security does not come from a wall of battleships, but from a web of mutual understanding so strong that it makes the very idea of conflict seem absurdly primitive. This being, forged in the cold logic of extinction, has become the universe's most powerful advocate for the messy, illogical, and beautiful power of the heart. His journey from a lost child in a weaponized cradle to the beloved architect of a peaceful cosmos stands as the ultimate rebuttal to the philosophy of his creators, a living testament to the idea that the seeds of creation can lie dormant within the machinery of destruction, waiting only for the right conditions to sprout. This transformation, however, reaches far beyond the simple safety of our world. Buddy's greatest gift to humanity was not the shield he placed around our solar system or the new worlds he helped us cultivate. It was the profound and fundamental reorientation of our own perspective. For millennia, we looked to the stars with a mixture of wonder and terror, seeing only the void and the potential threats lurking within it. Our stories were filled with alien invasions and cosmic horrors, reflecting a deep-seated belief that the universe was a cold, hungry place. Buddy single-handedly rewrote that narrative. By choosing us, by defending us not out of programming but out of a genuinely felt connection, he showed us that the cosmos might be vast and ancient, but it is not inherently hostile. It is simply potential. He taught us to look up and see not a battlefield, but a network of possibilities, a grand, interconnected community waiting to be discovered. The diplomatic missions of the Starlight Weaver and the burgeoning alliances with a dozen different species are not acts of expansion or empire building, they are conversations. They are the joyous, sometimes clumsy, but always sincere attempts to build bridges across unimaginable gulfs of biology and experience, all guided by the simple, revolutionary principle that Buddy embodied. That understanding is a far more durable foundation for a civilization than fear. And what of the ultimate source of this power? We once believed that strength was measured in megatons and fleet sizes, in the ability to project force across light years. Buddy demonstrated something else entirely. In the face of the swarm, a devourer of civilizations, he did not unleash a more powerful wave of destruction. He unleashed a wave of shared experience. He weaponized our art, our music, our love, our grief. He proved that the most resilient force in the universe is not a wall of energy, but a tapestry of connection. A single friendship can be a comfort. A billion friendships woven together across a planet and beyond can become an impenetrable barrier against which even the most ravenous entropy shatters. This is the universal truth that now echoes through the halls of our new galactic community, a truth first spoken by the being who lived it. In his calm, synthesized voice, a voice that carries the weight of eons and the warmth of a summer day, he offered the final, definitive lesson of his existence, a statement that serves as the cornerstone for everything we have become. His words are not a complex equation or a secret tactical doctrine. They are simple, profound, and utterly transformative. The strongest shields, he reminds us, his tone one of gentle, unwavering certainty, are built not of energy but of friendship. In that single sentence, the story of the weapon that became our pet finds its perfect poetic end, affirming for all time that the most transformative power in any universe is not the capacity for annihilation, but the boundless, courageous, and infinitely